The Daleks are cultural icons, and even people who don't watch Doctor Who know what they are. They're those bumpy metal cans with fairy lights on their head and a plunger that can suck your face off. But there are many more things about them that even fans of the show might not realise. I'm Ellie with Who Culture, here with 10 things everyone always gets wrong about the Daleks. Number 10. They first appeared in The Dead Planet. Doctor Who's second big iconic cliffhanger after the shadowy cavemen at the end of An Unearthly Child is Barbara being menaced by a Dalek. The cliffhanger ending to The Dead Planet is the first appearance of the Doctor's greatest enemy, the foe that would make the biggest impact on all their lives. However, that's not technically true. The first episode of Terry Nation's 7-part Dalek intro is certainly the first appearance of the Daleks on screen in universe. Behind the scenes, however, there's no full-size Dalek prop behind the camera during that iconic cliffhanger. Instead, it was actually assistant floor manager Michael Ferguson advancing upon Jacqueline Hill with a disembodied Dalek arm. I mean, it did the job, with Hill truly selling how terrifying her mysterious attacker was. It's a classic example of how Doctor Who is constantly inventive in its approach, given its limited budgets and resources. The Daleks' first proper appearance would be in the very next episode, The Survivors, in that stunning scene where the First Doctor, Susan, and Ian unwittingly walk into a room full of them. Number 9. The Dalek time machine is called a DARDIS, as in TARDIS, but with a D. There's a long-standing belief that the time machine created by the Daleks and used in The Chase and the Daleks' master plan was called the DARDIS, a Dalek spin on the name of the Doctor's own time machine. However, this simply is not true. In Terry Nation's original scripts for The Chase, it was simply referred to as the Dalek's time machine. However, story editor Dennis Spooner changed this to DARDIS in his rewrites of Nation's script. Director Richard Martin also adopted this shorthand for the camera script to aid him in shooting the complicated prop. Crucially, the time machine was never referred to as the DARDIS on screen, but that hasn't stopped fans adopting what was clearly a production shorthand on the part of Spooner and Martin. The DARDIS was first mentioned in universe in the 6th Doctor novel, The Quantum Archangel, where the Master is revealed to have stolen the core of the Daleks' DARDIS. However, more generally, writers are happy with the assertion that the Daleks can travel through time in a nameless, specially designed craft. After all, the Daleks don't need a fancy acronym like their arch-enemy does. Number 8. It's pronounced DARLEK, as in DARLEK. What does the Doctor eat with their spaghetti? Dalek bread. Nope, sorry, that joke fundamentally does not work. Apparently, Dalek and garlic don't rhyme, unless you're putting an erroneous R in there, which apparently I seem to do because I don't understand how Dalek can be said any other way. So quite where this strange, apparently, pronunciation first originated is unclear. The generally well-spoken Doctor's elongated R sound is being misinterpreted as a posh R, perhaps. Or is it a misunderstanding of that oft-repeatedly told story about Terry Nation coming up with the name by looking at an encyclopedia that covered everything from Dal to Lek? I mean, did people just think he got the name from Dar to Lek instead? Whatever the reason, there is definitely not an R in Dalek. That point I can definitely get behind. The spelling of Dalek, there is no R. They're mutated Khaleds and not mutated Khaleds, so I guess that does make sense, but it's not a Dalek. It's not a Dalek, it's a Dalek. I don't understand. This whole entry has frazzled my brain. Number 7. They're only armed with a plunger and an egg whisk. As Robert Sherman's groundbreaking Dalek episode proved, you underestimate a Dalek's plunger at your peril. And yet, for decades, people have derisively referred to the most fearsome race in the universe as being armed with a toilet plunger and an egg whisk. I mean, that's great for kids who want to terrorise Granny by pretending to be a Dalek, but it's not strictly true. For starters, the Daleks' gun sticks don't even look like egg whisks. Try making a souffle with a Dalek gun stick and there'll be a lot of sorely disappointed diners. Just ask Oswald. As for the plunger, it does operate on the same principle, being a manipulator arm for interacting with various buttons and dials. There are also Daleks that are much more fearsomely armed, like the Special Weapons Dalek from Remembrance of the Daleks, which has a full-on cannon sticking out of its midsection. Other Dalek variants include the flamethrower ones that set fire to the jungle on Kemble, or the terrifying laser cutter that terrorised poor sweet Linda, with a Y, in The Parting of the Ways. From cannons to flamethrowers, it's fair to say that the Daleks are far more heavily armed than the average household. Number 6. They only have 2 dome lights. Raymond Cusick's Dalek design is key to their legendary status, and it was criminal that he never saw more benefits for it. The two dome lights, the gun stick, the manipulator arm, and those gorgeous Dalek bumps are so great that the design has barely changed in 60 years. However, it's a falsehood to say that all Daleks have just two dome lights, as there are one or two notable exceptions to that rule. The Red Dalek Supreme in The Stolen Earth and Journey's End, and The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar, has 3 dome lights. It's very hard to see due to how it's shot in both stories, but if you find the right moment, you can glimpse the third light on the centre of its dome. Now, from a behind-the-scenes perspective, the dome lights have been seen as a translation device. That's why they flicker in time with Dalek dialogue throughout the majority of their appearances. Now, with that in mind, it's unclear what function this third light has for the Dalek Supreme beyond being a bit of bling, though it's possible that extra dome lights maybe denotes superiority? I don't know, what do you think? Number 5. Daleks are robots. We've all been to a hastily put together exhibition about robotics in a local museum, right? Those ones that include the Daleks and the Cybermen on their list of famous robots in pop culture? Well, they're wrong. Both the Daleks and the Cybermen are not robots because they're not wholly mechanical. They both contain a rather gruesome biological element, be it a one-eyed squid or a grisly human corpse a la Revelation of the Daleks. The same goes for the Daleks behind the scenes too. Many people assume that they're radio-controlled, but there have been manual operators inside those casings from the very beginning. Dalek operators like John Scott Martin and Barnaby Edwards are celebrities in their own right, which is something that can't be said for many other Doctor Who monsters. Having an organic component, or an actor, inside a Dalek is key to their appeal. This changed in the Chris Chibnall era when the skinny junkyard Dalek and the Dalek security drones were built for Resolution and Revolution of the Daleks, respectively. These new Daleks were remote controlled, meaning that there was no longer a need to have an operator inside them. I mean, that's a pretty cool job to have. I guess maybe not so much if you're really tall and have really long legs. I'd be perfect for this job, although I am slightly claustrophobic. Number 4, they must appear once a year. It's long been rumoured that the negotiations between the BBC and the Terry Nation estate to bring the Daleks back in 2005 had one particular stipulation, that the Daleks must appear once every series or year. This has never been confirmed by any Doctor Who showrunners, and it was actually denied by Stephen Moffat in 2014. And as a theory, it doesn't really hold up to much scrutiny. There's not a single Dalek story between Journey's End in 2008 and Victory of the Daleks in 2010. There's a minor Dalek cameo in the Waters of Mars, but does this really constitute an appearance? The derelict Dalek that the 11th Doctor consults in The Wedding of River Song feels less like a contractual obligation and more like using an existing prop as a budget-saving exercise. What Doctor Who fans sometimes forget is that the Daleks are massive cultural icons. Whovians may have tired of them, but the general public hasn't. Unleash a Dalek in a hotel lobby during a Doctor Who convention and there'll be a huge queue of people wanting a selfie. The show keeps bringing back the Daleks not because of an obligation to the nation estate, but because they guarantee a ratings spike. Number 3, they need a spokesperson. After Genesis of the Daleks introduced Davros, there was a feeling that he should speak for the Daleks in all future encounters. The problem with this was that the Daleks had never needed a spokesperson before. Throughout the 1960s, the Daleks are manipulative, controlling, and downright shifty. In The Power of the Daleks, they masquerade as robot servants on Vulcan while rebuilding their armies, and in The Evil of the Daleks, they dangle the ability to create gold in front of Professor Maxtable to convince him to go along with their plans. It's downright wrong to imply that the Daleks were incapable of having compelling conversations. Their clashes with Mavic Chen in the Daleks' master plan are truly memorable, as they regularly remind him who's boss. Once Davros was introduced, the Daleks were sadly reduced to killing machines that endlessly screeched their catchphrases, but thankfully RTD, Mark Gatiss, Moffat and Chibnall all remembered the sneakier side of the Daleks and have used Davros sparingly. I mean, take a look at The Stolen Earth and Journey's End. The Doctor literally taunts Davros and says that he's the Daleks' pet. Victory of the Daleks certainly has its problems, but it's a brilliant tribute to those servant Daleks from The Power of the Daleks. Also, my mind has just been blown because I was not aware until right now that the planet Vulcan exists in the Doctor Who universe as well as the Star Trek universe. Maybe Spock was behind it all along. Number 2, their look was based on a pepper pot. There's an old story that Raymond Cusick came up with the look of the Daleks while looking at a pepper pot in the BBC canteen. Well, as John Nathan Turner was fond of saying, the memory cheats. He did use a pepper pot to demonstrate how he envisioned the movement of the Daleks, but he'd already settled on his design by then. Going from Terry Nation's script, the designer realised that the Daleks would need an operator inside to move them around the studio floor, and that's why he designed the Daleks based on a person sitting down, perhaps with pedals and a wheel to manoeuvre the prop. The reason that the Daleks look the way they do is basically to do with increasing available legroom for the operators. In terms of how the Daleks moved, he was inspired by the Georgian state dancers, whose long flowing skirts covered their legs and feet as they glided across the stage. And then, to later explain how this would work on set, he picked up a pepper pot and began sliding it across the table. And thus, a legend was born. Number 1. Davros is a Dalek. No, Davros isn't a Dalek. He isn't even half Dalek, half human like the Dalek Sec hybrid in Series 3. Davros was a scientist who had lost the use of his legs and one arm, and who relied upon a travel machine to move around his complex on Skaro. In universe, the inspiration for the Dalek design came from Davros's chair, but he himself is not a Dalek. It's possibly this distinction that saved the BBC and the Terry Nation estate from paying out a substantial amount of money in a copyright suit back in 2011. The complainant, Steve Clark, claimed that he created Davros, a half-man, half-Dalek villain, for a TV action competition in 1972. Judges on the competition included John Pertwee, Terence Dix, and Barry Letts. So there's an outside chance that this competition inspired Letts to ask Nation to write the Daleks' origin story 3 years later. Crucially, however, Terry Nation and Philip Hinchcliffe were not judges on the competition and would likely not have seen the drawings. It's easy to just lump Davros in with the rest of the Daleks, since they of course always appear in stories together and are intrinsically linked. But Davros is entirely his own thing, a mad, coloured scientist who definitely should not be labelled as a Dalek himself. And there you go. I'm sure there's at least one thing on there that you're guilty of. I know there's definitely one for me. Comment down below what your favourite Dalek story is. We're intrigued. And don't forget to also check out 10 things everyone always gets wrong about the TARDIS. Maybe something will catch you out there as well. In the meantime, I've been Ellie with Who Culture, and in the words of Riversong herself, goodbye, sweeties.